consensus for various economic systems. Now we have to learn some consensus. Consensus for various economic systems. This is often used in newspapers, so you need to have some understanding about it. Consensus for various economic systems. There are three important consensus. Number one, Washington Consensus. Washington Consensus. Number two, Beijing Consensus. Number three, Santiago Consensus. Santiago Consensus. Okay. Major difference is between the Washington and the Beijing. That is the major difference. Santiago is somewhat, somewhat close to Beijing Consensus only. It is not, very different from that. Now let's see Washington Consensus. This name was given by John Williamson. John Williamson. Beijing Consensus name was given by Joshua Cooper Remo. Joshua Cooper Remo. It is a relatively new consensus that has been developed after the rise of China, and Joshua Cooper Remo gave it in 2004. Santiago was given by James D. Wolfenson. James D. Wolfenson in Santiago. Now, guys, I already told you, world over, after 1980s, there is not a single economy in the world that is a pure market economy or that is a pure non-market economy. Each and every country of the world has actually shifted to mixed economic system. Now, I told you in mixed economic system, there can be two types of economies. I told you in mixed economic system, there can be two types of economies. One can be a state-led economy and the other can be a market-led economy. That is, the leading role will be given to the market or the leading role will be given to the state. That is the difference in the consensus. Washington Consensus gives the leading role to market, gives the leading role to market. State as well plays some role, but that is not the leading role. Leading role will be given to the market. That is market-led growth. Market-led growth. It focuses on market-led growth. So this consensus is known as Washington Consensus because three important institutions are based in Washington that are the propounders of this consensus. Which are the three important institutions? Number one, IMF. Number two, World Bank. Number three, US Department of Treasury. US Department of Treasury. These are the three institutions that are the propounders of Washington Consensus. And they give this particular consensus, they want this particular consensus to be adopted by the developing economies. IMF, World Bank, and US Department of Treasury. Department of Treasury simply means the Finance Ministry of United States. Okay, that is known as the Department of Treasury. Now, these economists, these institutions, they actually propound this Washington Consensus, and they want the Washington Consensus to be adopted whenever a developing economy is in crisis. They actually want the Washington Consensus to be adopted, wherein the market will lead the economy. The state will have a minimalistic role to play in the economy, a minimal role to play. A minimal government intervention is allowed in Washington Consensus. But in contrast to the Washington Consensus, there is Beijing Consensus. And now people around the world, when Beijing Consensus started in 2004, when it was first coined by Joshua Cooper, people did not support Beijing Consensus. People did not support Beijing Consensus. Why? Because there is a heavy tilt of the world economies towards Washington Consensus, because they believed that these Western economies are at the zenith of their economic development. They have actually grown to a maximum amount. Therefore, we should follow these Western economic models. But later on, after 2008 global financial crisis, after the global financial crisis of 2008, therein we understood that why the global financial crisis started. It started because United States economy was deregulated. It was not able to regulate the banking sector, to regulate the insurance sector, to regulate the stock market. Because of that deregulation, global financial crisis happened in United States and in European world. And after the 2008 global financial crisis, people have, economies or the leaders have this urge, leaders have this increasing interest in the Beijing Consensus. And Beijing Consensus gives maximum role to state, and it focuses on state-led growth. It is a regulated economy, and that is a state-led growth, focuses on state-led growth. It is an alternative to Washington Consensus, and it is also known as the Chinese model. It is also known as the Chinese model, the state-led growth. After the 2008 financial crisis, 2009 financial crisis, there is an increasing interest in the Chinese model. And India is going the other way around. India had the Chinese model initially till 1990s. India is heavily tilting towards the market. And it is making our economy, very volatile. Volatility has not been in the history of India. This much of volatility we have never seen in the history of India. The reason is we are moving towards the market, increasingly moving towards the market. Currently, India is a market-led economy. Now, before 1990s, India was a state-led economy. India has been a mixed economy from the beginning, because the socialism that India had is something different than what USSR had. India's socialism is not state economy. India's socialism is mixed economy. India's socialism is private and public both. But a leading role was given initially to the state, which was changed after the LPG reforms, and now it is the market that is leading the economy right now. India is a market-led economy right now. And that is a worrisome situation. Volatile in the way that if you see that the global economy is in the crisis. We have seen an event, a COVID event, which is a once-in-a-century event. We know that the demand in the economy is less. We know there is demand crisis. We know that supply constraints have developed. There are supply-side hurdles in the economy right now. We know all these things are happening. Production has come down. Employment is at its peak. We know all these things are happening, but stock market is still high. What is the reason behind that? Yashvardhan, I'm asking you. Why is the stock market still high? If economy is not doing good, we have plunged down to minus 24%. Stock market is still high. That is a bubble. That is volatility. That is what volatility is. And when the bubble bursts, everybody is going to be impacted. Everybody is going to be impacted. Now, Santiago Consensus, given by James D. Wolfenson. He has been a World Bank president initially. Then he actually went to Santiago and gave this Santiago Consensus. The core idea, the basic idea revolves around the Beijing Consensus, but it adds one more phase to it, inclusive. It adds this inclusion phrase to the Beijing Consensus. That means we want to actually increase the growth in the economy, but the growth has to be inclusive growth. So it adds the core idea to the Beijing Consensus. The core idea is inclusion. So Santiago Consensus revolves around inclusion. Inclusion means not a particular sector will be growing, not the government will be growing. All the particular sectors of the economy together, we will have the inclusive growth. That is what it is actually inspired to do about. It wants to have an inclusive socio-economic growth. It wants to have an inclusive socio-economic growth. And it focuses on the concepts of inclusion, that none of these sections of the population shall be left behind. Nobody should be left behind. Is it clear?